My name is Sue Ronstrom. I'm hosting Dorie Clark, and very happy to be doing that. Dorie Clark is an adjunct professor at the Business Administration at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business and author of Reinventing You and her new book, right back there, Stand Out. Former presidential campaign spokeswoman, she is frequently contributing to Harvard Business Review, Time, and Entrepreneur. Recognized as a branding expert by Associated Press, Inc., and Fortune, Clark is a marketing strategy consultant and speaker for clients including, guessed it, Google, Microsoft, Yale, Fidelity, and the World Bank. You can learn more at her website at dorieclark.com. Welcome, Dorie Clark.
Thank you, Sue. And hello, Google. We live in a world today that is getting faster by the minute. The average employee gets more than 100 emails per day, and that rate is growing by 15% a year. Very soon, it's going to be unsustainable, if it's not already. You guys here at Google probably are already in the forefront of that. We live in a world where in the past minute that Sue has been introducing me, 100 hours of video was uploaded to your very own product, YouTube. With all of that, people and information is streaming at you. 20 years ago, it may have made good sense to follow your mom or dad's advice, to just keep your head down and do good work, and that would eventually be noticed and rewarded. But these days, with people being so bombarded with information, with tweets and meetings and emails and text messages and Snapchats and Instagrams coming at them, it's too much for people to take in. If we don't find a way to take control of our careers and to stand out, we risk being left behind. That's why I wrote the book Stand Out, because I wanted to try to understand, among the people who are considered the very best in their field, how did they get there? How did they come up with the ideas that they became known for? And how did they actually get recognized and build a following around them? So I spent a couple of years interviewing about 50 top experts in a cross-section of different fields, everything from genomics to real estate to urban planning to business to productivity, to try to understand what enables the top performers today to really get noticed and have their true talent seen, so that hopefully we could apply some of those same lessons to regular professionals today. One of the first things that I wanted to talk about, because I've been traveling around the country in the past couple of months since Stand Out came out, is the fact that sometimes when I'm having conversations with people about this, they say, oh, this is great. Yeah, I get it that we need to stand out, that it's important to have breakthrough ideas, but that's something that's good for other people. That's not me. I'm just a regular person. I'm not a genius. I don't know that I can really do this. And one of my very favorite examples, actually, is Starbucks. Something that even just walking here from the T, you see a million of them on every corner. Howard Schultz didn't invent coffee. He didn't invent coffee shops. What he came up with was a slightly different way to do a coffee shop. And yet that was enough to create a multi-billion-dollar worldwide empire. You don't need to be Einstein. You don't need to create the theory of relativity or to discover a new element on the periodic table. What you need to do is find a slightly different way to look at the world. And fortunately, because of your unique experiences, because no one sees the world exactly the way that you do, that's something that actually is eminently possible. One of the people that I profile in Stand Out is this woman. Her name is Rose Schumann. Rose grew up in suburban Maryland, and when she was 18 years old, she took a family trip to Nicaragua, because that's where her stepmother was from. It was shortly after the end of the Contra War, and Rose went down with her family, and she had never seen anything like it. She grew up in a comfortable suburban environment, and she was exposed for the first time to a country where all of the institutions that we take for granted weren't operating. There was one operative streetlight in the entire country. There was poverty unlike anything she had ever seen before. And she decided that she wanted to do something about it. And so she did. She went off to college, she studied development, she got a job after she graduated in an NGO, and she started working on the problems and rolling up her sleeves. Now, one of the most common myths about innovation, about creativity, about coming up with breakthrough ideas is that the people who have them have these bolts of insight. Suddenly the muses are whispering in their ear and they know what they have to do, and then they go and do it. And sure, I'm sure in some cases it works like that. But for the vast majority of people, and I think this is really important, for the vast majority of people, you don't start with a brilliant idea and then execute it. When I interviewed these 50 top thought leaders to try to understand what made them tick, what I heard again and again was actually the opposite of that. You start by caring about something. You start with curiosity. You start by having a passion to explore something. And in the process of diving into it, learning about it, seeing what it's made of and how you can make a contribution, that is how you can determine where you can have an impact and what kind of change you can make. In Rose's case, she had been working on these issues for several years before lightning struck her. One day she was walking around and she saw one of these. She saw a call box like you'd see at a transit station. Pretty simple. Push a button, talk to somebody on the other end of the line, ask a question or make a complaint, get your problem solved. And Rose saw this and she realized that this problem that had been in the back of her mind for so long, how do you get the power of the internet and bring it to the world's poorest 1 billion people? That might actually be how to do it. There's a lot of strategies that people have talked about how to bring the internet to the poor, but they involve a lot of steps. You have to give them laptops. You have to keep the laptops safe from the elements or from theft. You have to make sure the people are literate so that they can use the internet. You have to make sure they're literate in a language that exists on the internet. You can't really take all of those things for granted. But Rose realized with a simple push of a button, if you could wire it up so that people could talk to someone who spoke their language on the other end of the line, that's how they could get access to the full power of what the internet could offer. So she launched an initiative called Question Box, which today is operating in many cities in India and Africa. That was a lightning bolt in some ways. In a moment, looking around, paying attention, she saw it. But you hardly ever start with a lightning bolt. You start by caring. You start by looking at your own experiences, the way that you see the world uniquely. If Rose hadn't been to Nicaragua, if she hadn't taken that family trip, she probably never would have dug deeply enough to find that solution. For all of us, we have things that we've studied, passions, hobbies, cultural backgrounds, things that we've experienced. Oftentimes that's the starting point. So in the course of researching Standout, I discovered that there are 5 principal areas of finding your breakthrough idea. 5 chief ways that with all of these thinkers, you don't have to do all of these, but it's a bit of a smorgasbord where people draw from 1 or maybe 2, and it begins to inspire a cascade of the kind of breakthrough ideas they get known for. So I wanted to share with you some of the stories about them in hopes that maybe some of them might be a trigger for you to go deeper and develop further some of the ideas that you are nurturing. This gentleman is named Eric Schott. He's actually someone I used to consult for. He's the head of a genomics research institute at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. What's significant about Eric, and part of why I included him in Standout, is that today he's actually one of the most cited scientific researchers in the world. He's done more than 200 peer-reviewed papers on almost any disease imaginable. The reason he's been so successful in the world of biology, interestingly enough, is that he didn't start in biology. His initial training was in math and computer science. And as you guys might appreciate more than most, that gave him a quantitative way of looking at the world, a quantitative orientation, so that when he entered biology later in his career and he looked at it, he realized that the power of big data, which was just starting to become possible thanks to the rapid progress in genetic sequencing that was happening in the late 90s and early 2000s, people weren't taking advantage of that because classically trained biologists hadn't needed quantitative skills in that way. But because Eric had come from a different world, he saw the potential and dove into it, and it enabled him to make breakthroughs much faster than almost anyone else. One of the key elements when it comes to innovation is combining disciplines, combining perspectives. It becomes incredibly hard if you are too steeped in one methodology, whether it is the methodology of a discipline or even just the methodology, the ideology of one company, one way of looking at the world. If all you know is one thing, it becomes very, very hard to tell the difference between doing something one way because that is the best way or the only way that works, and doing it one way because it's habit. If you bring different perspectives together, you're able to question and to see what is mere habit and what, if the circumstances have changed in the interim, might be ripe for disruption and more productive change. The second thing that I learned in talking to these thought leaders about how to develop breakthrough ideas is the importance of what I will call tackling a worthy challenge. Now, I do a lot of podcast interviews. I've done well over 100 of them since the launch of Stand Out. And one of the questions that they often ask in the podcast is, who are the entrepreneurs that people admire? And I listen to lots of other podcasts, and so I've heard a cross-section of answers. And I'd be curious what you guys think. But when other entrepreneurs and writers are interviewed, what I hear on these podcasts and in write-ups, probably 9 times out of 10, if they are citing a living person who is their greatest inspiration, they always cite Elon Musk. And the reason I think they do that is that he is someone who, probably more unabashedly than most, is willing to aim big and to think big. Solar power, exploring the heavens, electric cars, those are challenges so big they get people excited. That's what fuels Google in many ways. All the exciting initiatives that you guys are doing with Google X and beyond. They're projects that attract the greatest minds. People want to be a part of them. Peter Diamandis, who's a business author and Silicon Valley thinker, has a saying that I like. The fastest way to make $1 billion is to help 1 billion people. There is a power in a big idea, because it becomes easier to get other people on board with you, to get other people excited, to give you funding, to help you, to join with you. You get the talent you need, and that creates momentum. This woman here is named Rita Gunther McGrath. She's a professor at Columbia, and a couple of years ago, she wrote a book called The End of Competitive Advantage. And the book has been lauded. Rita, in fact, has been named one of the top 10 management thinkers in the world. And part of the reason for that, and part of the reason I talked to her about this, is that in her book, she took on one of the most cherished ideas in management thinking, the idea of competitive advantage. Michael Porter and others, for a long time, for decades, the wisdom in business was that you needed, as a business, to find a competitive advantage and then keep it at all costs. What is your sustainable competitive advantage? Rita McGrath was one of the first thinkers to begin to probe that idea in light of the changes, the massively disruptive changes that we have been experiencing in our economy. The fact that the pace is picking up. It's been picking up so fast that even regular everyday customers are seeing it. People who carried a BlackBerry 5 years ago almost certainly don't have a BlackBerry today. People who shopped at Circuit City, people who shopped at Borders, are not shopping there today. We see it with our own eyes. And Rita was one of the first people to write a detailed book about what to do in that new environment. When sustainable competitive advantage is gone, how do you bake innovation into everything that you do? What's the next step? That's a question that people care about. If you can ride the wave, if you can find an idea that people are already interested in, that people are already talking about and want an answer to, and begin to make a move towards solving it, the power of that will bring people along with you and help your idea gain traction. Now, another strategy, a third strategy that I discovered in the course of talking to these experts is the niche strategy. This gentleman here is named Sopal Ir. Today he's a professor at Occidental College in Los Angeles, but he didn't start out there. When he was a baby, his mother rescued him and his 4 siblings, and they escaped together from the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. She was able, amazingly, in the midst of all the killing and genocide going on, to get her entire family out. And first they were refugees in France, and then eventually they made it to the United States. Sopal grew up and did well in school, pursued an academic career, and decided to become a political scientist. But in academia, as you guys know, the foundation of Google is PageRank, and where does PageRank come from? Well, it was inspired by academic citations. The more citations you have, the better off you are. And if you are an aspiring young academic, where the incentives are, is that you want to write about a topic that is sexy, that everyone is talking about, so that everyone will cite you. That's the sheer mathematics of getting jobs in academia. So if you're a political economist, what do you study? China, maybe? India? Brazil? Some of these burgeoning, growing economies. But Sopal wanted to do something different. He wanted to understand his homeland. That is why he was doing what he was doing. He wanted to understand it, and he wanted to find ways to give back, because he says, I was lucky to get out of Cambodia alive. So he became a Cambodian specialist. It might seem like the kiss of death for a young academic. I mean, Cambodia is an interesting place, but it's certainly not yet a superpower. But what Sopal's example shows, and part of why I wanted to include him in Stand Out, is that sometimes, counterintuitively, the narrower you go at first, if you keep the orientation that the first door you enter isn't the last door, it's just a hallway, and there are doors off of it. If that's how you begin thinking about your professional life, you can go in a lot of surprising and powerful directions. Sopal wrote his dissertation about foreign aid in Cambodia, and so he developed an expertise in foreign aid generally. That was great. But perhaps more surprising is the fact that one of the things that he ended up studying in the course of studying Cambodia was livestock. He had to write a paper because his advisor was advising an agricultural commission for the UN. It might seem pretty random, but when the bird flu epidemic struck, it turned out that Sopal was one of the few experts operating in America who actually had deep familiarity with Southeast Asian livestock practices, and he became a noted expert on avian flu. In fact, starting again with Cambodia, Sopal was able to give a very popular TED Talk, which if you guys haven't seen it, I recommend it, about criminal justice. And his entry point was the Khmer Rouge tribunals. You start with Cambodia, but you end up with the world. If you can establish an expertise in a narrow enough area, there's a phenomenon in psychology known as the halo effect. And essentially what it says is that if you come to be recognized as having expertise for one thing, you will be viewed in general by people as talented and smart and good. This is why we get the phenomenon of actors who get to be politicians, or business leaders who get to move into other fields. It's because people generalize. And so if you are able to own a niche and go deep, that gives you a powerful base, a powerful toehold to expand out and develop your brand as someone who's really knowledgeable. Another area which I think often gets overlooked, but I think particularly in a place like Google can be really powerful, is research, doing research. When I talk to people sometimes, when I'm advising businesses and professionals about this, they say, oh, well, that's great. Sure, of course research can be helpful, but I don't have time to do a doctorate, or I don't have the money to do a national survey. Of course, those things are great, but research, even on small levels, can be incredibly useful and powerful as a tool. It could be case studies, it could be reviews, it could be white papers, it could be somehow just going deep to provide some kind of quantitative new information, or qualitative for that matter. And my favorite example of this is this gentleman here. His name is Michael Waxenberg. And Michael, I discovered, was an IT manager for a financial services company. That was his job. It was and is his job. But completely inadvertently, he was able to develop a really lucrative and enjoyable sideline for himself. It all started about 15 years ago. He was living in New York City with his family, and he had just gotten the announcement that his condo, the apartment that he was living in, was going to be condoized. And he had to make a decision about whether his family would buy their unit. So Michael, he was a data-driven guy. He wanted to make a good decision about this. So he started going to open houses and visiting them. That's not very different than what you or I might do. But what he did do that was very different was he started writing reviews of the properties that he visited. Not, quick one line, this place is great, this place sucks. Really detailed reviews. It started out more for his own benefit than anything, just so he could keep them straight. But instead of keeping that information to himself, he posted it publicly on a real estate website called StreetEasy. And as a result, as he posted more and more, he started getting emails off the website with people saying, I love your reviews, they're fantastic. Will you represent me? And he had to write back and say, well, thank you so much, but I'm not a realtor. And so he started advising people just for fun on the side, but they couldn't give him any money. He wasn't licensed. They'd give him boxes of chocolates or bottles of wine, but he couldn't really do anything with it. But more and more people started coming to him. And eventually a realtor approached him and said, look, you already have a client base. If you haven't done this yet, I will sponsor you to become a realtor. And so Michael got his license, and now for years has been operating with no marketing whatsoever, a side business as a real estate agent, selling houses here and there and having people come to him on the strength of his reviews. Now, for me, what's critical here, this didn't cost money. It took a little time, but it's nothing that any of us can't do. Sometimes people think research and they think it has to be technical, they think it has to be complicated, but whether it's a review of real estate, whether it's writing up an in-depth report about something, we live in a world now, the internet world, where everyone has an opinion, where in fact half of what you look at is someone's opinion about someone's opinion about someone's opinion about the Kardashians. What we need more of is facts. What we need more of is people who are doing what Michael did with thoughtful research, thoughtful primary source research. That's something that with a little time and effort, any of us can do. Finally, the fifth strategy that I discovered in the course of writing Standout was what I call creating a framework. Some of you guys may know this guy. He has a lot of devotees. His name is David Allen, and he is the powerhouse behind Getting Things Done, the productivity system. Now, part of what I would argue makes David Allen and Getting Things Done so popular, so powerful, is the fact that just about everybody these days has, some kind of productivity tip about, oh, do this with your inbox or do that with your to-do list. David Allen has a system. He has a thorough system that helps you understand and explain not just here's what to do now, but to put productivity into context. We often think, oh, people have been doing this for decades. People have been doing this for hundreds of years. Everything that should have been said has been said, but not really. It wasn't until 30 years ago that Robert Cialdini developed the 6 principles of influence and persuasion. People have been studying persuasion from the beginning of time. You look back hundreds of years, you see Machiavelli's The Prince. People care about what it takes to persuade someone of something. But Robert Cialdini was able, great eminent researcher from Arizona State University, was able to be the first person to say, you know what? When it comes to influence and persuasion, there's actually only 6 ways to do it. Here's what they are. And it turned out that was so helpful, that was so instructive. Almost any time now that influence and persuasion is mentioned, Robert Cialdini is mentioned along with it. Now, with David Allen, anytime somebody says, oh, I'm so stressed out, I have way too many emails to respond to, people say, have you thought about getting things done? If you can create an explanatory framework, whether it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs or Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief, anything like that, those are famous examples. But even on the microscopic level, if you can create structures that help people understand a task better, a job better, a field better, that can be enormously powerful. In fact, going a little meta, that's what I'm trying to do with Stand Out, is to try to help explain the strategies of how to become a recognized expert in your field. But of course, coming up with the idea is only half the battle. It's only the first step. And so I wanted to just touch briefly on this question of how do you build a following around your idea? How do you get it known? How do you get it recognized by other people? I'll argue, based on the research that I did interviewing these top thought leaders, that it is a 3-step process to share your idea with the world and really begin to have it gain momentum and be fully recognized. The first step is building your network. The second step, building your audience. The third, building your community. I'll tackle them in turn. This woman is Kari Anderson, and I profiled her in Stand Out as kind of the exemplar of building your network because I've known her for a number of years, but it actually wasn't until I started talking to her for this book that I discovered this story that she had that I thought was so remarkable, I knew I had to share it. Kari, it turns out, used to be a journalist. And in 1989, she created a kind of mastermind group of fellow journalists where they would get together monthly, trade ideas about stories, about the profession, about how to do their jobs better. And it was so powerful for her. It was such a good experience, such a good learning experience, that a few years later, when she had shifted over to become a professional speaker, she started a second mastermind group in 1994 of fellow speakers to do the same thing. Just, half a dozen or so people meeting once a month to trade ideas. Now, a lot of people do something like that. But what I thought was amazing was that it turns out Kari is still meeting with these groups. 20 and 25 years later, she is meeting monthly with the same people. And she says that this has actually been one of the most singular professional experiences of her life. Now, the moral of the story is not that we all need to start mastermind groups that last a quarter century, although I'm sure it would be beneficial. But what I take from her experience is that the most important thing, the most important step, and I heard this again and again from the thought leaders that I profiled, you have to start with a base of people. You have to start with a small base of trusted colleagues that you respect and listen to and have honest connections with, so that They aren't afraid to tell you when your idea is amazing, and they aren't afraid to tell you when your idea is bad, so that you can refine it. And by the time you share it with the world, by the time you begin building a broader audience, it's in as good a shape as it can possibly be. Too few of us have this because we're responding to stimuli all day long. Maybe we need to listen to David Allen a little bit more, because for a lot of us, the people we hang out with, the people we spend time with, it's the people who email us. Who do you have coffee with? Who do you have lunch with? Well, guess what? For a lot of us, it's whoever asks. That's not how it should be. We need to be more deliberate about thinking through who are the 3 people, the 5 people, the 8 people that we most want to be spending time with, the people that we want to learn from, the people we truly respect and who raise our game. If we can be proactive about spending time with them, that is one of the most important career moves that we can make, because they can provide us with the insights and support that we need. That's the first step. The second step, of course, because if an idea is going to spread, it can't just be with people you know. The second step is building your audience. And fortunately, these days, we have more ability than ever to do something like that. We are able to blog about it, to give speeches like this about it. We can tweet, we can go on Pinterest, we can share it on social media, we can do webinars, we can have podcasts. There's a million ways of spreading it. But still, we have a lot of people who are shy about standing out, people who are nervous about sharing their ideas for fear that they might be shot down. But first of all, if you have this trusted group of advisors who have given you feedback, then by the time your idea reaches the place where you're able to begin sharing it with the world, you've already had some smart eyes looking at it. There's already a pretty good chance that your idea has some merit to it. But really the way that I think about this, and I take the image from a conversation I had with a thinker named John Hagel from Deloitte Center for the Edge. He said that putting your ideas out there, whether it's blogging or using some other method, it's like putting a light out. It's like sharing a beacon and putting it out there so that like-minded people can see it and come to you. In this noisy, crowded world, we have to make ourselves discoverable. With 7 billion people in the world, there are people who care about the things that you care about. There are people who see the world the same way that you do. There are people who need your ideas, but it's loud. There's a lot of material out there. They have to be able to find you, and they can't do it unless we are willing to step up and share our ideas. And it could be something as simple as putting out a blog post on LinkedIn, or starting a Twitter account where you don't even have to put out your own ideas at first. It can just be curating what you think is interesting around subjects you care about. But it's beginning to find a way to put the pings out into the universe to see if you get an echo back. Now, we're all busy. And one of the challenges, I hear this talking to people all the time, is, okay, Dorie, that's great, but how do I have time to create content or be active on social media or any of these things when I have a crazy job and I'm busy and I'm being stretched too thin anyway? And I respect that. I think that's true for most of us, if not all of us. I think the key here, and something that I want to highlight, something I talk about in Standout, is the power of leverage. Some of you may recognize this guy. He's fairly well known in the tech space, Robert Scoble, well-known opinion leader in technology. And when I interviewed Robert for this book, he told me something interesting. He's somebody who gets hundreds, if not thousands, of emails a day. He's constantly being contacted by startups that would like to talk to him or get his advice or have him feature them in some forum. And what he told me, is that when someone asks him a question, when they email him a question, he writes back and he says, I would be happy to answer your question, but not on email. What he tells them instead is that they should post their question on Quora, the question and answer website, and that he will answer it there. And the reason he says he does it is that he says, if I email someone the answer, I've helped one person. But if I put the answer on the internet, I'm able to help 5 people or 50 people or 500 people. That's how we need to start thinking. All of us have too many meetings. All of us suffer from too little time. If we can begin to think strategically about how we can leverage our impact, leverage our ideas, share them with more people with the same amount of effort, that's what it's going to take to enable our ideas to really grow and spread. Finally, what I discovered in the course of researching Stand Out is that when you start with building your network, you start small, you start with this close-knit, trusted group, you move to building your audience, going one to many, talking to a larger group. Those are all important steps. But when an idea fully takes shape, when it begins to grow to a level where things are happening on its own, where the dominoes are falling, what happens in that moment is that your audience that has been listening to you starts talking to each other. And that is the moment where an audience becomes a community. So one example, perhaps near and dear to some of your tech hearts, the Lean Startup. This is Eric Ries, the author of that book, bestseller a couple of years ago. Today, there are more than 750,000 people worldwide who are registered for Lean Startup meetup groups. That's more people, certainly, than Eric Ries could address in a room, maybe even in a year, maybe even in a lifetime. It's a huge number of people who are voluntarily organizing around that idea. And what I discovered in the course of writing and researching Stand Out is that if you want your idea to go viral, if you want your audience members to start talking to each other about them and forming a community around your idea, 2 things need to happen. There's a technical element. You want to try to find a way to make it easy for people to talk to each other. Maybe it's by having a conference like the Lean Startup does every year. Maybe it's by having meetup groups where people can get together around the world. Eric Ries will sometimes call in, he'll do Skype calls with new chapters to encourage them. Maybe it's creating an online message board or a Google Groups or some form of online discussion, a Facebook page, whatever it is, but some way that people can be in touch with each other directly and have those conversations without you. Because an idea will always spread farther if you're not the only one saying it. But that's the technical element. Even more than the technical is the philosophical. If your idea is really going to spread, from the beginning, something important needs to be baked into your idea. And that is, it has to have value for people other than yourself. The reason that people are going to spread ideas is that they feel that it's relevant to their own lives. They see themselves in it. They feel that it's helpful. For Eric Ries, it's not about supporting him or making his book a bestseller. That's nice. But what people care about is making it less likely that their startup is going to fail. They're having these conversations because they want to be more successful and they view that as a tool. If your idea has utility for other people, if other people can see in it a way to better their own lives, they want to share that message and they're going to be excited to do so. And that is how you can build a movement. In today's society, moving faster than ever, it is increasingly critical to stand out. In fact, standing out is no longer optional. We need to find ways to make an impact. In an internet-driven society, there's a race to the bottom. People are being commoditized. They're looking for the lowest price option. And we need to give employers and customers a reason to choose us specifically. We have to find a way to stand out. It doesn't mean that every single person has to be a world expert in something, but it does mean that whether it's in our company or in our department or in our community, it's increasingly essential for us to ask, what can I do that no one else can do? What can I do better than anyone else? How can I bring my unique experiences to bear on this problem or on this challenge? We used to live in a world where what mattered most was how you were similar to everybody else. Did you think the same way? Did you toe the company line? What matters most today is the differences you bring and the fact that you do see the world differently than everyone else. That's the power of standing out. Thank you very much. Anyway, now that I know that there actually is time for questions, I would love to take any of your comments if you would like to have them.
Yeah, you talked about how having a broad experience can help you come up with new and interesting ideas. But you also talked about finding a niche and diving deep. How do you sort of balance those two aspects?
Fantastic question. How do you balance the distinction between going broad and drawing from all kinds of experiences and also niching down? So number one, you don't necessarily have to do both. You could choose either approach, and either one could be a winning approach. But let's say you wanted to do them both. So I'm going to make up an example. Let's say you work at Google and you have a special passion. All your life you have been a really serious jazz musician, and that's something that's pretty distinct from everyone else here. Let's pretend. So if that's the case, that would be drawing in those things. What can you do to niche down? Let's say you decide, I know within Google, one of the great things that I've heard from the many friends that I have working in the company is that there's a lot of opportunity for people to move around into different job roles, different offices. In a lot of ways, after rotations in certain areas, you can sort of raise your hand and say, hey, I'm interested in moving over here. Maybe because of this background, you have decided that there's a particular niche that you might be able to dive deep on, that you have a special relationship to. Let's say wearable technology for musicians, and how that could improve the sonic experience if they're wearing some whatever. And I don't know enough about either technology or music to be able to get more specific than that. But it's by bringing together the different elements of what excites you and what's different, where because you're doing this digging and exploration, you can start to see in the process of looking into it where there might be elements that could be helpful. You could do the same thing with running or sports or whatever, but there's places that you can go deep, and because you have ties to that community and a special understanding as a practitioner, you have immediately more credibility and probably more knowledge starting in on it that can give you an advantage when you niche down. Does that answer your question? Great, thank you. Hi.
Hello. So how do you avoid the selection bias that comes with just looking at people who succeeded, and then maybe something that most of them did is actually a thing that most of the time doesn't work well for the people who do it, but you're not looking at the people who didn't succeed, so you don't know, how do you avoid that issue?
Fantastic question. You don't, is my answer. One of my goals is I actually started my career as a journalist, and so my ambition from the start was to go deep and to tell interesting qualitative stories about the people who are the most successful today. I agree with you entirely that a cross-sectional study of people who have succeeded, people who have failed, this sort of big picture, big data even, maybe we can get Eric Schott on it, look at success and failure today in a variety of fields would be a really interesting and worthy problem to tackle. It was not the problem that I tackled, however. For me, I was really interested in going deep and having a more qualitative view of some of the people that I think personally are pretty interesting. If any of you guys follow business literature, I spoke with Dan Pink, with Tom Peters, with Robert Cialdini, with David Allen, as I mentioned, with Seth Godin. So they were pretty cool folks. And then in other fields, I also drew from them as well. But great point, absolutely. I was mostly trying to tell a different story. Yes.
Hi, thanks for your talk. And a lot of the factors that you point out, I can sort of see in play when I look at some successful people. But I'm interested in some factors that also seem to often pop up that you didn't mention, and curious where you fit them in. Things that I often see pop up, the role of luck. You even mentioned with a couple of your people that, all of a sudden out of the blue, there was the avian flu, right? And then bang, you was a superstar, right? So there's the role of luck, there's the role of not just your social network, but having like the right people in your social network, right? The powerful people, the ones who actually make the key decisions. And finally, there's, this dynamic that everybody else is trying to stand out too, right? And so you're sort of in the sea of competition of everybody trying to stand out, which you sort of alluded to. But beyond, the general advice, like how do you pop out to the top of that? So I don't know, a lot of factors at play. What do you think?
Fantastic, I love it. So interestingly enough, I actually have nearly a whole chapter on the role of luck in the book. So I hope you've been able to grab a copy, but I'll tell you guys briefly, luck is actually one of the more interesting elements of this, and one that oftentimes I actually close the talk with. So here in Cambridge, actually, very close to here, there's a venture capital firm called Cue Ball Partners. It's run by a guy named Anthony Chan and some of his partners. A few years ago, they wrote a book called Hearts, Smarts, Guts, and Luck. It came out actually from Harvard Business Review Press, which published my first book, Reinventing You. And interestingly enough, so they did a pretty wide-ranging study of entrepreneurs who had been successful, and they broke people down into 4 personality types, actually. And you can even go to their website. They have something called the EAT, the Entrepreneurial Assessment Test, which is kind of fun to take. And it shows you what your dominant personality type is. The first 3, to me, make fairly intuitive sense, right? Hearts-driven, smarts-driven, guts-driven. We can all imagine scenarios where people are able to succeed because of those qualities. The one that was a little bit more mystifying was luck-driven. What does that even mean? But it turns out, if you peel it back, interestingly enough, the research begins to show, of course, luck is something that we can only attribute post facto, right? You don't know in the moment that something is lucky. It's kind of like, after it plays out, how does it, then it becomes lucky. What does it look like in the moment, however? It turns out that lucky entrepreneurs or top executives are people who actually have a different personality type than the other types of successful professionals. They are typically more laid back, and they exhibit in large quantities 2 really important attributes that all of us can develop more of in our lives. One is curiosity, and the other is humility. And the reason that this plays in is so many of the people, so many of the successful professionals that they profiled, they have a mission, right? Part of what makes them successful is they're so focused. They say, I'm going to go to this meeting and I'm going to meet the head of marketing for Ford, or I'm going to go to this meeting and I'm going to meet venture capitalists who will give me, my Series A funding, or whatever it is. But they have this idea in their head, and if they don't see things that look like that, they will barrel through. Whereas a lucky entrepreneur or executive is someone who is far more willing to just sit back and say, this person seems interesting, I'll talk to them. And they wait and they see how it plays out. And they have the conversation, and they are curious enough to want to learn about that person, and they are humble enough to realize that they have something to learn from that person. And years later, that is what plays out and turns to luck. So I think that's one of the coolest things that I learned from that book and from that research. Also, Richard Weissman is a psychologist who's done a lot of research into luck. One suggestion that he has, which you guys can apply if you're interested, there's a factor that that comes into play with almost all humans, which is that we really tend to be drawn to people who are like us. This is natural. It's not necessarily good in terms of diversity or innovation or whatever. And so Richard Wiseman actually talked about somebody that he interviewed, and this guy, the way that he broke out of that is that he made a rule for himself if he was going to a networking event or a cocktail party, that he would pick a color in advance, and he would only talk to people wearing that color, so that he would be forced to choose different people than he might normally to talk to. And that's a way to increase our luck. So I think it's a really rich topic. Let's talk more afterwards about your other points, but I love them. Really good questions. Ma'am, what was your question or comment?
Thank you very much for this talk. It's really great information. So I'm just following up on something you just said about being flexible and open, which is kind of a natural way that I approach things. But when you first said earlier about being deliberate, I said, that's what I need to introduce. So how do you reconcile being flexible and seeing what's out there and allowing yourself to see the possibilities with being deliberate and actually moving in the direction that you want to go?
Yeah, so it's an important question, and in many ways it's similar to the going wide versus going narrow. I would say in general, we can choose to play to our strengths, whatever our strength is. However, there is a way to bring them together. I mean, certainly in terms of a lot of the career research that I do, one piece of advice that I would give to the professionals that I counsel and work with in my consulting business is have a plan, but treat it as a hypothesis. It's something that you're moving toward so that you are moving toward something, so that you have some degree of forward momentum, but don't allow it to lock you in. If you see something over to the side that is better or is more interesting or is something that you literally just could not have predicted because you couldn't have even seen it until you reached the halfway point in your march toward that new thing, then feel free to veer off and go do that. But always have something that at least provisionally you're working toward so that you're able to enjoy the benefits of forward momentum and seeing things from new vistas that you previously wouldn't have been able to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So my question is about promoting an idea on your own, through a startup versus taking advantage of the momentum of being at a place like Google. So say if you think about self-driving cars, right? The reason why Google can make such awesome self-driving cars as compared to, say, the ones that you see prototyped in academia is because Google just has more data and they have more people and they have more resources and they have more of everything, right? And infrastructure. And so, if I have this awesome idea, did you see anything about whether it makes more sense for me to try to build up a startup on my own and own the idea to give it credibility so then I can make it into something huge or sell it? Or is it more practical to try to pitch it to a company earlier, but then how do you build credibility around the idea instead of having somebody just toss it on the back burner? So I guess going on your own versus working with a big company.
Yeah, really important. So there's actually a couple of questions at play. One is the personal branding question. How do you get known and get credibility as being the driving force behind a certain idea? And then the other is the question of where is the best home for that idea in terms of operationalizing it and actually making sure that it has the resources necessary to be successful. It's in the Silicon Valley ecosystem, acqui-hires are a big thing now where companies, as you guys well know, large companies will snap up a smaller company because they want the development talent and they will shutter the projects with impunity and say, okay, fellas, now you're working on this. And that's a real thing. So I think that in a technical sense about what is necessary for the success of an idea, I think that it's important to keep in mind a few things. Number one, is it feasible to do the idea on your own? Sometimes literally it's not, because you need to have data or access to other resources that only a big company could provide. If you realize that in 3 months or 6 months or a year, you are going to be hitting a wall that you can't surmount because you literally don't have access to the tools you need, then it probably does fundamentally need to be done within the confines of a larger system. if you do decide to partner with a company, then it's a question of making sure that you have contracts and legal protections as much as you possibly can that validate that this idea is not going to be shuttered, and that you have ways of protecting it and keeping it as an ongoing concern, perhaps with a sort of special mandate. When it comes to your personal brand, one of the things that I'll advise, and I'll just wrap up because we're getting the curtain warning here momentarily, but one of the things that I think is important for all of us to be aware of is the amazing resource that is content creation. Sometimes people come to me and they say, well, I have these great ideas, but I don't want to talk about them because someone might steal them. And you hear this a lot from people. And so my asterisk on this, okay, sure, if you have this amazing patentable engineering innovation, great, go patent it, go do that, go protect that first. But if you have an idea and it's an idea about the nature of leadership or something like that, you can't patent it, but it doesn't go anywhere if you don't talk about it. Is there going to be a risk that someone might steal it? Maybe, but I will tell you the very best insurance against it is for you to be everywhere talking about it. Because if I came to you and said, hey, I have a really great idea for a book about women's empowerment, it's called Lean In, you would laugh in my face and you'd say, I think that's been done by Sheryl Sandberg, Dorie. And it doesn't go any further. Everyone knows that's her idea. And so the antidote to anyone stealing your ideas, or your idea dying for that matter, is to get the word out. And so I would say if you want to be known and associated for something, go nuts with blogging, with content creation, being out there touting it so that your name is almost inextricably entwined with it. And then that way, whether you get acquired, partner with somebody or not, you're going to be known as the go-to person behind that idea. So thank you so much for your question. Thank you everybody for having me, and have a great day. Thanks.